The crisis didn't start in Beijing. It started with a single warehouse worker in Mumbai who opened a crate and froze, not because of what he saw, but because of what he didn't. The magnets inside were spotless. Too spotless. No shipping dust, no handling marks, as if they had skipped half their journey. Within hours, India's customs database lit up with discrepancies, and halfway across the world, European defense contractors discovered that the same magnets they were counting on had vanished from their inventory pipelines. Then came the shockwave. China's tracking system identified the shipment's atomic signature as material from a restricted complex in Inner Mongolia, now appearing inside Western military procurement trails. Beijing suspended multiple export licenses before breakfast. By noon, automakers were shutting down assembly lines, and by nightfall, one impossible question was hanging over 3 continents. Who moved 120 tons of Chinese rare earths through India, and why did China catch it first? The shutdown notices appeared without warning across European parts suppliers as production lines stalled for lack of magnets. The disruption began when Beijing abruptly tightened rare earth export rules in the spring, slowing shipments to a crawl as thousands of license applications piled up. Reuters reported that approvals could now take months, and that customs officers had been instructed to suspend exports until every batch cleared new end-use scrutiny. Ford's chief financial officer told the same outlet that the shortages were already bleeding into automaking schedules, and that Western manufacturers would need to ration inventories. Weeks later, a separate investigation described how a major U.S. magnet maker with defense clients had received only a handful of permits out of nearly 200 applications since the new system began. Those approvals, all restricted to non-defense contracts, underscored how Beijing was now filtering exports by purpose rather than quantity. In India, the same controls reshaped procurement math. Imports of rare earth magnets surged above 50,000 tons in the previous fiscal year, according to customs data cited by Reuters, even though India holds its own reserves. The problem was refining capacity. India could mine the ore, but it lacked facilities to turn it into the high-purity magnets required for advanced motors. That gap pushed one company, Sona Comstar, into the spotlight. The automotive component giant disclosed that it had purchased about 120 tons of rare earth magnets from China, with plans to lift that to 200 as electric vehicle demand grew. Publicly, the firm described its imports as a bridge strategy, an interim step until its own magnet plant could start production under a government incentive program designed to cut dependence on Chinese suppliers. At the same time, Beijing introduced a digital tracking system requiring producers to upload detailed shipment data, including trading volumes and customer names. 3 industry sources said the platform had gone live nationwide by mid-year, making it nearly impossible to hide end users behind layers of resellers. In October, China expanded the restricted list again, adding 5 new elements and extending control from raw oxides to finished alloys and components. Even a device containing trace amounts of Chinese material now needed a license if Chinese equipment or know-how had been used in its manufacture. European manufacturers were soon warning of production delays and rising costs as approval queues stretched for months. In the United States, companies found defense-related requests facing the tightest scrutiny. One Illinois-based magnet maker said its approvals had slowed to a trickle. Washington responded by funding new refining and magnet projects at home, pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into facilities in Texas and California, and supporting partnerships with suppliers in Greenland and Australia. India faced its own reckoning. Officials began drafting incentive plans to stockpile magnets and subsidize domestic production. Senior industry figures said those measures were meant to protect automakers and defense contractors from sudden Chinese export freezes. Yet such programs would take years to deliver results. Engineers, meanwhile, experimented with redesigned motors that could operate with smaller amounts of heavy rare earths like dysprosium and terbium, a technical workaround to material scarcity. Why this matters? The entire magnet supply chain had become a political equation. Every shipment now carried a question about its destination, and companies straddling civilian and military markets faced conflicting obligations. Beijing added another layer of oversight by introducing quarterly audits requiring importers to submit proof of how the materials were actually used. The documents had to match the original license applications line by line: production orders, client lists, delivery receipts. When discrepancies appeared, investigators could track shipments using a combination of RFID tags and GPS-linked transport data. What had once been paperwork now functioned as a live ledger. Within that new regime, a rumor began circulating through trade channels that some batches imported under civilian licenses had been repackaged in Southeast Asia and resold into Western military projects. The reports named no specific buyer but alleged that the transfers had slipped through before China's tracking network reached full coverage. Beijing's digital forensics capability, combining transaction records with isotopic fingerprinting of the metals themselves, soon made such diversions nearly impossible. But the allegation itself was enough to inflame diplomatic tempers. Sona Comstar insisted its imports were strictly for electric vehicle motor production and reaffirmed its commitment to building magnet capacity inside India. Yet the timing of the allegations coincided with China's decision to blacklist several foreign importers pending review, freezing new export applications from companies operating in gray zones between civilian and defense sectors. Why this matters. A licensing dispute over one consignment can cascade through entire industries. A single frozen permit can idle an automotive line or delay a weapons system delivery. As Beijing's controls deepened, Washington and Brussels accelerated diversification plans. The United States Department of Defense announced long-term supply agreements with new domestic magnet producers. Australia's Lynas established a processing partnership in the United States to feed those plants directly. European policymakers, facing the same bottleneck, debated creating a continental stockpile of critical minerals. The numbers told the story. China still refined nearly 9 out of every 10 kilograms of rare earths processed worldwide. No other country had yet built enough capacity to offset a full export halt. Each new rule from Beijing sent shockwaves through pricing, investment, and strategic planning. For India, the calculation was even sharper. Despite its mineral reserves, it remained dependent on Chinese high-purity material for both civilian and defense manufacturing. That dependence turned the 120-ton magnet deal into a national symbol, a measure of how far India had to go to achieve autonomy in advanced materials. Behind closed doors, defense planners in several capitals discussed how to insulate supply chains from future Chinese audits. Some explored joint ventures in Vietnam and Malaysia, hoping to assemble components outside the direct reach of China's licensing system. Others pressed for rapid substitution ceramics, ferrites, or non-rare earth alloys, even at the cost of efficiency. Beijing, meanwhile, refined its surveillance of the industry. The new magnet tracking system assigned each shipment a unique digital signature, embedding production site coordinates and processing data that could not be altered once recorded. Combined with isotope analysis capable of linking a batch to its original mine, the system gave Chinese regulators forensic visibility across global trade. Why this matters. Once a material's origin can be identified by its atomic pattern, relabeling or rerouting offers no real escape. The technology turned compliance into physics. By the end of the year, nearly all major Chinese producers were integrated into the system, closing loopholes that had allowed smuggling and false declarations. For exporters, this meant any irregularity, missing documentation, mismatched volumes, could trigger immediate suspension. For importers, it meant that every ton carried a traceable identity from mine to motor. In public statements, Indian officials argued that critical minerals should never be used as political leverage. Prime Minister Narendra Modi called for cooperative frameworks to ensure stable supply, urging that no nation weaponize resources essential to global development. Chinese representatives countered that export licensing is a sovereign right, not coercion, and that national security considerations justify strict control. Across boardrooms and ministries, the mood grew pragmatic. European companies accelerated magnet recycling programs. United States investors poured funds into alternative chemistry research, and Indian engineers rushed to meet quality standards for homegrown production. Each step brought small relief, but underscored a larger truth. Global industries had built their future around a resource they did not control. The political rhetoric softened at moments, but the audits did not. Customs officers in China continued to require quarterly proof of end use. Western firms still waited months for licenses, and every fresh announcement from Beijing sent procurement teams back to their spreadsheets to remodel risk exposure. In this tense equilibrium, the 120-ton magnet shipment remained a symbol, whether seen as an ordinary transaction, an alleged diversion, or simply the most scrutinized cargo of the year. It illustrated the new reality. Every gram of critical material now travels under geopolitical surveillance. The open question is what comes first, industrial self-sufficiency or the next round of restrictions. Factories can adapt, engineers can innovate, and miners can dig, but the policy clock keeps ticking. The final calculation may rest on who masters scale faster, the nation's building new capacity or the one that already controls the gates. By the time the last crates were counted and the paperwork rechecked, the truth was impossible to ignore. The magnets were never the crisis. The crisis was how easily one shipment exposed the wiring of the entire global economy. India discovered its bottleneck, Europe discovered its blind spot, and Washington discovered that diversification plans move a lot slower than Beijing's rules. What began as a routine import had turned into a map of who depends on whom and who can shut whom down. And now every capital is building stockpiles, rewriting laws, hunting for alternatives, trying to outrun a system designed somewhere else. But the math hasn't changed. China still controls the refining. China still controls the licensing. And China still controls the clock. So the world is left with a single, uncomfortable question. When the next shipment stalls, will it be a warning or the start of something no one can restart? We're glad you're enjoying this video. Please like and subscribe. Check out another video that is now on your screen.